Hello, curious people. Today I am here to help you. I know you are using this video to help you fall asleep. So, before you like this video and subscribe to the channel, tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Make yourself comfortable now. I stepped into the stories. Kaylee has been my best friend for as long as I can remember. For me, that's not a figure of speech. I literally can't remember how I met her. I can't find any photos of me with her before third grade, so I guess I met her around then. Strangely, though, she's not in any of my class photos. I remember her coming over my house all the time, but I don't ever remember going to hers. These things never struck me as weird until a few days ago, when I really sat down and thought about them. Some things in life you just sort of accept as fact, right? They've gone on so long, you don't remember how they started. Like how I always put eggs on the top shelf of the fridge, or how I always tuck my blanket under my feet before going to bed. I don't remember how it started. I've just always done it that way, as long as I can remember. So how did I meet her? I don't remember. They say if you lose your sight, you don't see pitch black, or nothingness, or a void. You just have the absence of sight. That's how it is for me with Kaylee. There's no remnant of a memory, nothing on the tip of my tongue. It just isn't there. A few days ago, I asked her about it. Do you remember how we met? What do you mean? She asked, her smile faltering. Well, we met when I was around 8, right? But you went to a different school. So, how did we meet? It was at that summer camp, wasn't it? She asked. With the bottle rockets? I don't think so. I'd only gone one summer, and I was pretty sure that was the summer after 4th grade. Church, then. Which church? Kaylee paused. The one off Main Street, with the steeple. Which one? Oh, I'm not sure. You know I'm not religious, she said with a laugh. The one on the corner, or on Elm Street. She paused. Elm, I think. Well, my parents took me to St. Paul's on the corner, I said. So it couldn't have been church. Huh, she said, shrugging. Then I don't know how we met. It was weird. She seemed confused, and yet it almost felt like she was playing the role of a fortune teller, throwing out vague answers and hoping I'd jump in with more details. So you don't remember how we met, I said with finality. I guess I don't. She shook her head, her bleach blonde hair shaking around her face. Isn't that silly? We've been best friends for 10 years, and we can't even remember how we met. I wanted to ask her more, but then my roommate got home, and my roommate is a bit persnickety, so we decided to quietly watch a movie in my room to give her some peace. It seemed weird to bring up again. I was probably overthinking things. That night, however, I couldn't sleep. As Kaylee slept peacefully on the futon in the common area, I lay wide awake in my bed. Why can't I remember? And then a thought occurred to me. Someone else must remember. I went on Facebook and clicked over to our 21 mutual friends. I started scrolling, making a mental list of who was most likely to know. But then, a sudden realization hit me. Each of these friends I'd introduced to her. None of these were her friends originally. They were all mine. I squinted at the screen. How does that make sense? Has she really never introduced me to her friends? And now that I thought about it, she was always visiting me at my dorm. making the 2-hour drive she offered because I was broke and couldn't afford the gas. But maybe there was more to it than that. Why had I never thought about this before? I scrolled back through my Facebook photos to some childhood photos I'd posted. Kaylee was in them, sure as day. She looked different. Her hair wasn't bleached then. Her face was chubbier, but from the dimples to the sharp chin, it was her. I clicked back on her Facebook page and scrolled, and that's when I realized something. Every single post involved me or one of our 21 mutual friends. I didn't see a single tag by someone I didn't know. Well, that could be the privacy settings, couldn't it? Like her friends who've tagged her have made the post only visible to their friends or mutuals or something, but not a single post. It was like her entire life revolved around me, like every single event in her life was related to me, directly or indirectly. I gave up on sleep. I got out of bed and walked into the common room, grabbing a Coke from the mini fridge. Kaylee was sleeping soundly on the futon. I glanced over at her, my heart pounding. Her pale skin was blue in the light from the microwave clock. Muffled music came from my roommate's room. She was still up. With my mind racing and no one else to talk to, I went over. "Can I come in for a second?" I called quietly through the door. As soon as she opened it, I darted inside. "There's something weird about Kaylee," Isabel scoffed. Yeah, duh. What? She's weird. Always has been. You just noticing this now?" I frowned at her. "Okay, sorry. That came out really mean. But it's true. She's just weird. I wish she wouldn't come over every weekend. But since you're really good about Ben coming over, I never say anything." "She doesn't come over every weekend," I huffed. "It's been a lot. I mean, she was here homecoming weekend, then those 2 weekends in October, then Halloween." "She wasn't here Halloween," I protested. "Oh yes, she was," Isabel replied. "Ben and I had to go over to his place, because she was here with you." I shook my head. "No, she wasn't here Halloween." We stared at each other. Isabel's irritation melted to confusion. She wasn't here. I had COVID, remember? But I saw her. When we came back from the Beta Theta Pi party, she was here. We had to go to Ben's place. The room started to tilt around me. I remember being so sick that weekend, in and out of sleep, half the day. But she was here, without me knowing? "You must have gotten the weekends confused," I said weakly. "No, I remember it clearly, because we were both in our costumes. Do you know how itchy that Harley Quinn wig is? Kaylee must have let herself in. But why? Now that I thought about it, that weekend, there had been some weird stuff. I'd chalked it up to delirium at the time, but I remember not being able to find my phone. My milk was missing from the fridge. I thought it had been Isabel or Ben, but it had been Kaylee. She was here, watching me sleep. What the fuck?" I was jolted out of my thoughts by a thump outside, coming from the common room. "Kaylee," I whispered. The footsteps, slow and deliberate, started down the hall. My door creaked open. "She's looking for me." I ran over to the door and locked it. I held a finger to my lips, standing absolutely still, so still I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. The footsteps started back up, into the common room, and then towards our door, getting louder. Isabel glanced down, and her eyes went wide. "She's right there," Isabel mouthed to me. The footsteps stopped. The door handle made a ratcheting sound as Kaylee tried to turn it. Once, twice, 3 times. "Haley, are you in there?" I held my breath. "Isabel." I closed my eyes. "She'll just go away. She'll think Isabel's asleep." And I just stepped out. Isabel's computer is on, but it's dark in here, so we're fine. I took in a slow, quiet breath. We're fine. She's just going to go back to sleep. 1, 2, 3, 4. "I know you're in there." A raspy whisper, unlike anything I'd heard Kaylee say, and it was coming from the crack under the door. I could feel her breath against my ankles. Isabel clapped a hand over her mouth. I took a shaking step away from the door. "Let me in," she whispered. Her slim, pale fingers shot through the crack under the door and swept back and forth, quickly, frantically, trying to grab any part of us she could. "Let me in now." Isabel grabbed her phone off the desk and dialed 911. The fingers retracted, and footsteps sounded in the common room. By the time the police got here, Kaylee was gone. It's been 2 days, and I haven't heard from Kaylee. I think about her every waking minute. I've barely eaten or slept. I keep replaying that night through my head, wondering what she would have done if I hadn't locked the door. I've done my research, though, combed through social media and photo albums and everything. There is no physical evidence that Kaylee existed in my life before a year ago, because those photos from my childhood, my mom insists I never had a friend named Kaylee. When she dug the old photo albums out of the attic, she wasn't in any of them. Kaylee's face only appeared in the digital scans of the photos I'd posted online. Photos I'd posted in the past year, and those 21 mutual friends. They all met her in the past year, too. She'd made an effort to befriend my friends, find them online, but none of the friendships went back more than a year. I'd checked each and every one, and now, suddenly, I'm having trouble recalling all those memories with her. I can barely remember what she looked like. Blonde hair, pale skin, dimples. I knew that much. But if you showed me a lineup of 10 girls with those qualities, I don't think I'd be able to pick her out. Which leads me to the horrifying conclusion. If she ever finds me again, whether that's in days, or years, or decades, I won't even know it's her. Dopa Bean, March 18th, single 18. Fuck HIPAA. My new patient is literally in her own little world, and it's creepy as hell. On February 10th, 1998, emergency services responded to a domestic violence call in Fargo, North Dakota. They arrived on scene to discover a semi-conscious woman who bore signs of severe injuries and mutilation consistent with torture. The bedroom in which she was discovered contained blood-stained ligatures, bedding, clothing, and a variety of weapons, including a baseball bat, a hatchet, a kitchen knife, a machete, and dumbbell plates, all of which bore signs of use. In the center of the room was a large shattered mirror. Broken glass covered the room. One shard, approximately 8 inches in length and 3 inches in width, was lodged in the victim's stomach. The victim, who was clearly delirious, told officers that her boyfriend did this to her. But it's not his fault. He was crazy, and the mirror made him crazier. Despite extensive search efforts, no other individual was discovered on scene. including the victim's boyfriend. It should be noted that this man was never located and to date is considered missing. EMS transported the victim to the hospital where emergency surgery commenced. No matter what treatment was rendered, the wound inflicted by the large mirror shard would not heal. After significant medical intervention, it stopped bleeding but did not knit, effectively leaving the victim with a small cavern in her abdomen. Approximately 2 weeks into her hospital stay, one of the nurses providing treatment went into hysterics and refused to go back into her room. When asked, the nurse explained that while performing wound care, she looked inside the patient's wound and saw a room. According to the nurse, the patient herself somehow inside this room, inside the wound, smiling back at her. The patient was not capable of providing any additional information. At this time, she was still extremely mentally unstable, owing to her ordeal, and medically fragile. Shortly after this, the patient was taken for further study with the goal of closing her wound once and for all. The details of this study are disturbing and fundamentally irrelevant. Suffice to say, the medical professionals studying her wound also observed this bizarre room described by the nurse. Following a distinctly unfortunate incident relating to this room, hospital staff facilitated her transfer to the custody of AHH Naskew. The inmate, Miss Polly, has been with the agency ever since. She is currently a T-class agent assigned to the agency director. Miss Polly's ability is simply astonishing. In simplest terms, she is the keeper of an open-ended pocket dimension. This dimension takes the form of a living room, paneled in mirrors. Ms. Polly says the space is identical to the living room of her childhood home, except for the mirror walls. The entrance to this pocket reality is the wound cut into Miss Polly's abdomen by the mirror shard. Miss Polly and administration both agree that the spectacular properties of this wound derive directly from the properties of the broken mirror that inflicted the injury. After taking her into custody, agency personnel attempted to find additional shards of the mirror, but were unsuccessful. Notably, the pocket dimension includes a front door that, when opened, leads to other locations. Previously, Miss Polly claimed to have no idea where the door led. However, following the recent escape of inmate 70, Ward 2, the man who never smiles, the agency learned that Miss Polly not only knows where the door leads to, but can control where it goes. Given inmate 70's unique abilities, Ms. Polly was not disciplined for his containment breach. However, on 12/14/24, when she was caught trying to help inmate 22, Ward 1, Lifeblood, breach containment, it should be noted that inmate 22 reported Miss Polly of her own volition, although she displayed extreme emotional distress at the idea that Miss Polly would get in trouble. After this incident, Miss Polly was fitted with a device that removes her ability to control whether to open or close her pocket dimension. When the device is active, her body is intact, the wound appears to be healed, and no going in or out. The agency director currently monitors this device himself. Miss Polly is a 51-year-old adult female. She is 5'9", tall, with brown hair and blue eyes. She suffers from major depressive disorder and anxiety. Despite extensive therapy and full compliance with her treatment plans, she experiences, and now, suddenly, I'm having trouble recalling all those memories with her. I can barely remember what she looked like. Blonde hair, pale skin, dimples. I knew that much. But if you showed me a lineup of 10 girls with those qualities, I don't think I'd be able to pick her out. Which leads me to the horrifying conclusion. If she ever finds me again, whether that's in days, or years, or decades, I won't even know it's her. Dopa Bean, March 18th, single 18. Fuck HIPAA. My new patient is literally in her own little world, and it's creepy as hell. On February 10th, 1998, emergency services responded to a domestic violence call in Fargo, North Dakota. They arrived on scene to discover a semi-conscious woman who bore signs of severe injuries and mutilation consistent with torture. The bedroom in which she was discovered contained blood-stained ligatures, bedding, clothing, and a variety of weapons, including a baseball bat, a hatchet, a kitchen knife, a machete, and dumbbell plates, all of which bore signs of use. In the center of the room was a large shattered mirror. Broken glass covered the room. One shard, approximately 8 inches in length and 3 inches in width, was lodged in the victim's stomach. The victim, who was clearly delirious, told officers that her boyfriend did this to her. But it's not his fault. He was crazy, and the mirror made him crazier. Despite extensive search efforts, no other individual was discovered on scene, including the victim's boyfriend. It should be noted that this man was never located, and to date is considered missing. EMS transported the victim to the hospital, where emergency surgery commenced. No matter what treatment was rendered, the wound inflicted by the large mirror shard would not heal. After significant medical intervention, it stopped bleeding, but did not knit, effectively leaving the victim with a small cavern in her abdomen. Approximately 2 weeks into her hospital stay, one of the nurses providing treatment went into hysterics and refused to go back into her room. When asked, the nurse explained that while performing wound care, she looked inside the patient's wound and saw a room. According to the nurse, the patient herself, somehow inside this room, inside the wound, smiling back at her. The patient was not capable of providing any additional information. At this time, she was still extremely mentally unstable, owing to her ordeal, and medically fragile. Shortly after this, the patient was taken for further study with the goal of closing her wound once and for all. The details of this study are disturbing and fundamentally irrelevant. Suffice to say, the medical professionals studying her wound also observed this bizarre room described by the nurse. Following a distinctly unfortunate incident relating to this room, hospital staff facilitated her transfer to the custody of AHH Naskew. The inmate, Miss Polly, has been with the agency ever since. She is currently a T-class agent assigned to the agency director. Miss Polly's ability is simply astonishing. In simplest terms, she is the keeper of an open-ended pocket dimension. This dimension takes the form of a living room, paneled in mirrors. Ms. Polly says the space is identical to the living room of her childhood home, except for the mirror walls. The entrance to this pocket reality is the wound cut into Miss Polly's abdomen by the mirror shard. Miss Polly and administration both agree that the spectacular properties of this wound derive directly from the properties of the broken mirror that inflicted the injury. After taking her into custody, agency personnel attempted to find additional shards of the mirror, but were unsuccessful. Notably, the pocket dimension includes a front door that, when opened, leads to other locations. Previously, Miss Polly claimed to have no idea where the door led. However, following the recent escape of inmate 70, Ward 2, the man who never smiles, the agency learned that Miss Polly not only knows where the door leads to, but can control where it goes. Given inmate 70's unique abilities, Ms. Polly was not disciplined for his containment breach. However, on 12/14/24, when she was caught trying to help inmate 22, Ward 1, Lifeblood, breach containment, it should be noted that inmate 22 reported Miss Polly of her own volition, although she displayed extreme emotional distress at the idea that Miss Polly would get in trouble. After this incident, Miss Polly was fitted with a device that removes her ability to control whether to open or close her pocket dimension. When the device is active, her body is intact, the wound appears to be healed, and no going in or out. The agency director currently monitors this device himself. Miss Polly is a 51-year-old adult female. She is 5'9", tall, with brown hair and blue eyes. She suffers from major depressive disorder and anxiety. Despite extensive therapy and full compliance with her treatment plans, she experiences, at the director's discretion, she still maintains T-class status, albeit in a highly restricted capacity. Interview subject: Polly Pocket classification, string, uncooperative, destructible, Gaian, constant, low, Apaley. Interviewers: Rachele B. and Christophe W. Interview. Date: 12/21/2024. My boyfriend used to talk to mirrors. He told me that talking to his reflection was a coping mechanism he developed as a kid. I had a few of my own weird coping mechanisms, so I understood. I didn't like it. Mirrors have always made me uneasy, but I understood. Besides, talking to the mirror wasn't the only bizarre thing he did, and certainly not the scariest. Not by a long shot. Crazy is a bad word, especially for people like me. I hate using it, even now. But looking back, Philip was crazy. But at the time, his particular kind of crazy felt familiar. He felt comfortable. He felt like home. Everyone wants to find home, me included. So what are you supposed to do when crazy feels like home? No one else has ever felt like home to me. Only him. And he wasn't a monster. Far from it. He was sweet and thoughtful and stable enough to get custody of his baby sister, Alice, who adored him. They had the same eyes, this spectacular pale green. Most importantly, Philip was sure about me from the very beginning. He showed it every day. He once told me that he knew we were meant to be from our very first conversation, like he'd known me his entire life, or that we'd known each other in 1,000 prior lives. I didn't believe in any of that, of course, but I believed the way he treated me, and he treated me extremely well. Above all, he was so considerate. It'd take days to tell you everything he did for me, but just as an example, I once told him no one had ever read me a bedtime story. From that point on, every night before we went to sleep, he'd tell me a story. Sometimes fairy tales, sometimes urban legends, usually stories he made up himself. Falling asleep next to him while he whispered a story in my ear is one of my favorite memories, even now. I asked him once where he got his story ideas. From the mirror, he teased. I talk to it, and it talks back. In a lot of ways, he was wonderful. Now, don't get me wrong, our lows transcendently awful, but the highs were correspondingly spectacular. And even on the worst days, we never went to sleep angry. That was a first for me. Even if we'd been fighting, even if we'd been screaming, even if we were angry, and even if I was scared, that all melted away as soon as we got into bed and he started telling a story. That's why it was so easy to stay with him. As for the things that made it hard to stay, well, that's where my own weird childhood coping mechanism came into play. When I was a little girl, I used to imagine a little pocket behind my heart, a hidden, dark, secure, and above all safe place where I put all my bad feelings. That pocket is where I shoved all my fears and doubts about Philip, and it's where I hid all the instincts that screamed at me to leave him. There were a lot of those, too many, but the heart pocket was magic. So whenever I had too many bad feelings for the pocket to hold, it grew to accommodate them. Once, after this particularly insane fight, I could practically feel it expanding. I felt it stretching from my heart to my hips, gently displacing my organs and grazing along my bones. I was sure I'd be able to press down on my stomach and feel it hiding, firm and heavy and full of all the darkness that threatened my light. I hated our fights. I hated how they made me feel. I hated how they made him feel. I hated that they were never about anything important. I hated that Alice had to hear them. Most of all, I hated how he talked to the mirror after every one of those fights, because no matter what he said about coping mechanisms, he only ever got worse after he talked to mirrors. There was one day, maybe a week after the new year, where we basically started fighting the minute we woke up. Nothing I did helped. No matter what I did, everything just kept getting worse and worse, snowballing into something uncontrollable. I could feel it in my gut and in the depths of my heart pocket. We were headed for disaster, and that night, he didn't get into bed with me. He stayed in the bathroom, talking to his mirror. What I heard him say was terrifying. He kept repeating, "Every life, we kill each other." And he kept saying he needed to sever the soul tie. How pain is the only way. That's what he kept saying. Pain is the only way. The greater the pain, the cleaner the cut. You have to do it. It's the only way to end this forever. It's the only way to save each other. I tried to shove all the fear into my heart pocket, but it wouldn't fit. It kept bursting out to run through my bloodstream in terrible electric surges. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. At 3 in the morning on that frozen January night, I confronted him. He had something in his face made me sure that he was about to hurt me. So I dragged Alice out of bed. It wasn't hard. She was wide awake and crying, bright green eyes swollen and swimming with tears. Bundled her into her coat and took her to the car. It was snowing. We slipped and slid on the icy driveway as gusts of wind tore through our coats. Philip came after us, screaming, begging us to stay, that he needed to save us once and for all. He even chased after the car. I saw him in the rearview mirror, a manic shadow that only vanished when I turned the corner and sped away. The snow was coming down hard, and the wind was spinning it out into billowing blankets. It was impossible to see. I wasn't driving well, to begin with, because of stress. About 10 minutes after we left the house, I hit a patch of ice. The car spun out of control. I heard Alice scream. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. Philip was slumped in a chair by my bed, fast asleep and whiter than a sheet. I tried to wake him up, but my head was swimming. The world was tilting. I couldn't remember anything. I fell asleep again. When I woke up, the doctors told me I'd make a full recovery. By some miracle, I'd survived. Alice had not. Somehow, Philip didn't blame me. It's so awful to say, but losing Alice changed him for the better. No more fights, no more screaming, no more anything, just hopeless gentleness. He stopped doing all the little, considerate things I'd loved, so I did them instead. I didn't tell him bedtime stories, though. That was a uniquely Philip thing. Even the thought of whispering fairy tales to him as he drifted off felt like a betrayal in a way I couldn't articulate. The only thing that didn't change was the mirror. He still talked to the mirror. He always kept his voice so low that I couldn't make out his words. Sometimes it sounded like two voices. But one morning, about a year after we lost Alice, I woke up to the familiar sounds of his mirror conversation. For once, he was talking loudly enough for me to hear, and he was crying. How am I supposed to hurt her? How can you expect me to do any of this? Then he shushed himself, and his voice returned to that indistinguishable softness. I almost left that day, but I didn't. The next morning, Philip basically became a different man. He woke me up with toast and coffee for breakfast, something he hadn't done in nearly 2 years. He started smiling again and doing all those little things he used to do. And that night, after I climbed into bed, he brought me a cup of tea. While I sipped it, he finally told me another bedtime story. Once upon a time, a woman named Acrasia fell in love with a man named Kairos. But Kairos wouldn't have her. Kairos was rich, you see, while Acrasia lived with her penniless father in a hovel by the sea. Out of desperation, Acrasia went to the god Hinthala. She entered his mirror palace and offered anything and everything in her possession if only Hinthala would make Kairos love her. You have nothing, Hinthala told her. Nothing but the clothes on your back. Clothes do not buy love. Love buys love. Your father loves you. Bring me your green-eyed father, and I will make Kairos love you. So Acrasia brought her father to the mirror palace. Hinthala accepted him as an offering and told her to go to Kairos. He will love you now and forever, he promised. From this moment until the very last star dies for the very last time. Acrasia went to Kairos. True to Hinthala's word, he loved her above all else, but he still would not take her to wife. He would have to renounce his family and the bride they had already chosen for him. Though he loved Acrasia deeply, he would not forsake everything for her. Acrasia held on to hope that Kairos would change his mind, but he did not. On the night of his wedding, she flung herself into the sea and drowned. Kairos grieved her passing deeply, for he did love her. But although he loved Acrasia until his dying day, he never regretted the choice to keep his family, his position, and his inheritance. And that was the end. This story is about us, Philip said quietly. I felt sick. I knew, somehow, that this was Philip's way of ending things with me. Through tears, I asked, so what? Am I supposed to be Acrasia? No, he cupped my face. Never. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, smearing the tear against my skin. You were Kairos. For the second time, something in his face made me sure I was about to die. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was halfway out of bed, but when my feet hit the floor, the world spun and stretched, swinging upward, and I fell back. Philip shot forward and pinned me down. I tried to struggle, but every time I moved, the world flipped upside down. I felt like I was stuck to the ceiling. Whatever was holding me, was giving way, like I was about to fall to the floor and smash like a porcelain doll. It's going to be okay, Philip soothed. I promise. Listen, please listen. I'm doing this because I love you. I have to sever our tie, for your sake and for mine. We find each other in every life. It should be beautiful, but it's not. We always destroy each other and everyone around us. The mirror told me. The mirror never lies. If I'd listened to it, Alice would be alive, and you would be happy somewhere else. I know it. I know it. He tied me down. I tried to fight, but whatever he put in my tea rendered me helpless. As he worked, he explained what he was going to do and why. Memories don't transfer, but essence does. We have to make our essence remember. The only way to do that is suffering. We have to make it hurt so badly that our essences repulse each other in the next life and every life that comes after. It's the only way we'll be happy, by making sure we never love each other. Then he got up and left. I tried to wriggle out of the restraints, but every time I moved my head, the room spun. Some time later, maybe a minute, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour or 6 or 2 days, he came back with the mirror. He put it on top of the dresser, angling it so I could see myself. Then he came to the edge of the bed and told me another story. I could barely follow his words. My head was swimming. Consciousness dipped in and out, just like when I'd been in the hospital after the wreck. A long time ago, 2 homeless orphans were best friends. A beautiful and very angry girl, and a sad little boy with a green-eyed cat that he loved more than anything except the girl. All they had was each other. They slept during the day to avoid those who might prey on 2 small children alone in the world. They woke at sunset and traveled at night, stealing fruit from moonlit orchards and eggs from the sleepy chickens in their coops. But when winter came, the orchards died and the chickens stopped laying. The children were soon starving. One bitter morning, the girl left the boy and his green-eyed cat sleeping in a barn and revealed herself to the farmer. The farmer welcomed her into his house, but he did not help her. When the boy woke to find the girl gone, he thought she had abandoned him, so he cried. But then his green-eyed cat hurried to the barn door, meowing. When the boy left the barn, he heard the girl screaming from inside the farmhouse. His little cat found a way inside through a broken window and led him through dusty, sunlit rooms to a door behind which he heard the girl weeping. She was in a terrible state, but he helped her to her feet. The cat led them back through the dusty, sunlit rooms to the broken window. The cat jumped onto the sill, but lost her balance and fell back. She knocked a pot to the floor, where it shattered. The sound alerted the farmer. As he came crashing down the stairs, the boy helped the girl through the window. He tried to follow, but the farmer caught him. The boy's last memory was the sound of his cat meowing as he died. The girl tried and saved him, but she was too late and too wounded, besides, and died for her trouble. When Philip finished, he leaned over and picked up a baseball bat. It made me scream, which made him cry. "I'm sorry," he wept. "I'm so, so sorry." He brought the bat down on my knee, once, twice, 3 times. Agony, pure, white-out agony. I could hear myself scream, but barely noticed. The mirror loomed across from me, dark as a nighttime pool. I imagined teeth inside the glass, bared in a smile. Philip talked to the mirror after. As he spoke, I felt my heart pocket shudder and expand. I pretended to open it and dropped things inside. Fear, the dizziness, the overwhelming pain in my knee. It was slow and tortuous, but by the time Philip had finished and curled up next to me, whispering tearful apologies, I was able to sleep. The next day, he told another story, but I interrupted him quickly, calling him a fucked up, gender-bent Scheherazade. I told him he needed help. I promised I'd get him help. I told him I loved him. I still loved him, and would always love him, and none of this changed that. Just, please, 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 please. He struck me with enough force to daze me. As my ears rang and dark spots swarmed my eyes, Philip told another, a story in between his own sobs. He told me of another life where I was captured by a warlord. He traded his green-eyed sister to the warlord to free me so we could escape together. But it was all for naught, because we died anyway, long before we reached safety. As he spoke, I saw glimmers of his story, scenes from a fading dream. The warlord grinning as he pulled the green-eyed sister in and shoved me out. Philip's sick and haunted eyes. But they weren't Philip's eyes. It wasn't Philip's face. The devastated countryside, the bugs and animals feasting on the dead left to rot among the rocks, the roving band that finally killed us long before we reached our destination. When Philip finished, he pulled out a knife. I immediately kicked him, sending the knife skittering across the floor. He moaned, then picked up the bat and smashed my other knee. He screamed even louder than I did. Then he talked to the mirror. After he left, I prayed, not to God, but to my heart pocket. I prayed for it to become huge, bigger than big, bigger than the room I was in, and it answered. I felt it grow, felt my organs shifting, the tickle as it scraped along my ribcage. When I felt it was big enough, I opened it up and dropped myself inside it. Part of me was still in Philip's bedroom, gazing blankly at the mirror while I wept. But the other, bigger, more important part was inside my heart room. It looked just like my childhood living room, early on Saturday mornings, right down to the cartoons on the TV, and the half-eaten bowl of cereal on the floor, and the battered cardboard boxes stacked against the wall to pre-dawn gloom outside the windows. I sat on the floor, crisscross applesauce, and watched Looney Tunes, and ate soggy cereal until Philip came back. He told me another story, some fucked up beauty, and the Beast analog about a man who was a monster inside and out, and the woman he loved, who was just as monstrous, but only on the inside. When they were finally caught, she betrayed him to save herself. He attacked her in a heartbroken rage, only to find out it wasn't true. Her betrayal had been a clever ruse to save him. The hunters killed them both. He died loathing himself, as he drowned in his own blood. There were no glimmers this time. I saw the entire thing in the mirror, as clearly as if it were playing on TV. Philip hurt me again. I don't remember what he did, because I managed to hide inside my heart room before the pain entirely hit. But even from the depths of my heart room, I heard Philip talking to the mirror, and this time I heard something talking back. For the first time, it occurred to me that I was losing my mind. With that realization came a storm of rage, pain, and above all, terror. The terror made me feel crazier than all the rest put together. I felt it coming up my throat, like vomit, but impossibly too much. Enough to tear my throat open, to rupture my stomach, corrosive enough to burn holes in my heart room. I ran blindly to the stack of battered boxes in the corner, dumped one out, and vomited everything inside me into the box. The box swelled and undulated like it was going to burst open, but it held. When I was done, I closed up the box. Then I shuffled back across the room, sat down in front of the blaring TV, and continued to eat my cereal. Philip came back a while later to tell me yet another story of how our other selves did nothing but ruin each other and everyone around them. I don't remember what it was about, because the moment I saw him, I opened the door to my heart room and hid inside. This is how it went for days, maybe weeks, maybe even months. Every day, Philip told me some awful bedtime story where some man or woman or child destroyed the person who loved them most out of cowardice or calculation or terror. After every story, he hurt me. After he hurt me, he told me through his own tears that the pain was another blow against the soul tie. Once it was cut, we would finally be free. And in the scheme of eternity, all of this would be nothing but a bad dream. Then he would talk to the mirror, and the mirror would talk back. No matter how deeply I hid in the pocket room beside my heart, no matter how loudly I crunched cereal, or how loudly I turned up the volume on the TV, I always heard the mirror talk back. That frightened me. The point of my pocket room was to protect myself, to preserve my sanity, to make sure I got out of anything I fell into alive. But even my room couldn't protect me from the fact that Philip's mirror always talked back. Philip got worse and worse. But I do remember the day he broke the fingers on my right hand. He cried because I loved to play the violin, and with broken fingers, I would never be able to play again. That made me laugh. That's why I remember it. Because it made me laugh until I gagged. I mean, of all the things to worry about while you're torturing your girlfriend to death, that's what breaks you. That was actually it, though. It really is what broke him. After that, Philip told the mirror he couldn't hurt me anymore, that he would never hurt me again. For some reason, that pulled me out of my pocket room. Just as I surfaced, he left, tried to go back inside myself, but couldn't. The door to the pocket room was locked, so I stared at the mirror, crying weakly as tides of pain drowned me. As I faded out, the mirror flickered to brightness, just like a TV, and I saw another story. Two men in military uniforms, cut off from their squad and hiding from enemies. One was a monster of a man, a quintessential soldier. The other was his opposite, small and badly wounded. He expected the big one to leave him. I expected the big one to leave him. Instead, he bundled the small one in his own jacket and kept watch for hours while the winds screamed and enemies trekked by obliviously. He built a small fire and used it to cauterize the small one's wound. When the coast was finally clear, he hoisted the little one onto his back and carried him for hours until he caught up with their squadron. No one got hurt. No one betrayed anyone else. No one died, and the two of them stayed best friends until the day the big one died. It was a good ending, a happy one, and I knew, as that story faded away, that it wasn't the only happy one. I focused on the mirror, willing it to show me something else, something that was good. It did, and a third time, and a fourth, again and again and again. All day long, Philip finally came back, apologizing. I got weak. I'm sorry. That was unfair to you. I have to be strong to break our tie for good. From now on, I will be. I saw that he had a hatchet with him. The truth flooded out of me. All of the good stories, all of the love, every last detail of every last happy life. Where did you see this? He asked. In your mirror, I said. For the last time in his life, Philip had a breakdown. But unlike his other breakdowns, this one felt right to me, even positive. Like the breakdown was an earthquake, shattered the hole in which he'd fallen, and he was riding back to the surface on a tidal swell of broken earth. Like he was finally coming back to himself. Like a spell had broken. Once it broke, he ran to me and started untying my restraints. But then the mirror spoke again. Something ancient and deep and awful. Something that made my bones thrum. The mirror blazed to a flat, brilliant, shimmering darkness. Philip threw it to the ground, shattering it. The broken glass shot upward and whirled impossibly, like a tornado. Pieces spun out, cutting Philip, embedding themselves in the walls. One huge shard flew at me. I saw Philip's reflection for an instant, and then my own right. Before it lodged itself in my stomach, I felt it cut my pocket room. I felt the contents spill into my bloodstream. The storm stopped. Shards fell to the floor like shining rain, thudding on the carpet, clattering against the glass still clinging to the frame. As I watched, the floor inside the frame flickered and vanished, transforming into a void, into a bottomless, black tunnel, just like in the cartoons I watched in my pocket room. Shining white hands rose out of the mirror tunnel and gripped the frame as Philip reached for me. If my pocket room had not been cut, I would have reached for him too. I would have pulled him close, away from the glimmering black tunnel and those shining monster hands. But my pocket room had been cut, everything inside it, all the hate, all the pain, all the rage, for Philip and for everyone and everything else was surging through me now. I'd been torn open. I had become a passageway, a door, a portal, not just for my own pain, but for the suffering of each and every life we'd been cursed to share. When he saw my expression, he crawled back. Glass crunched under his hands. He left smeary handprints of blood on the carpet. His backed into the broken mirror. The moment he touched it, those shimmering white hands grabbed him and pulled him down into that insane tunnel. I lunged after him. When I hit the floor, every bone and muscle in my body screamed, but that pain wasn't enough to stop me. I crawled to mirror frame and looked down into the tunnel. There he was. Beneath him, far below in the darkness, something billowed into being. something ghostly bright and shimmering, with monstrous hands grasping upward. I reached for him, lost my balance, and started to fall. And as I fell, I saw the walls of the tunnel, or the wormhole, or whatever you want to call it, were alive, like a cosmic TV. I saw things I recognized, things from my own life, things from my life with Philip. I saw other things that I didn't recognize with my eyes, but still recognized with my heart. I saw things I didn't know at all. I saw things that frightened me. I saw things that felt terribly wrong, and things that felt beautifully right. 10 million scenes from 10 million lives whirling around me, bright and almost blinding against the dark tunnel. Somehow, I knew in the truest part of me that I could have reached out and fallen into any one of those lives and lived there without being any the wiser. But I didn't care about any of those lives. I only cared about Philip falling into the arms of the monster far below. My fingers finally brushed his. His hand convulsed on mine. Pain exploded as the broken bones ground against each other. I thought he was going to claw his way up my arm, even though it would hurt, even though the pain would be exquisitely hideous. That was all I wanted. Instead, he shoved me away. He continued to fall, but I shot upward, spinning back like a retracting yo-yo, far, farther, farthest, past the empty mirror frame and back in the blood-stained bedroom. Even though the room tilted and swam, even though I was in more pain than I could even comprehend, I dragged myself to the phone and called the police. This will sound insane, more insane than what I've already told you. While I waited for the ambulance to come, the shimmer-handed monster spoke to me from the shard of mirror lodged in my guts. It was impossible to make him let you go. Is it broken? The room swam around me. I wondered if I was about to die. The soul tie. Is it broken? There is no soul tie. That was a lie. I tell many lies. Even the lives I showed him were lies. Most of them weren't even yours. I started to cry. Did he end it? At least, like he wanted to. That's all he wanted. Is it over now? No. Didn't you hear what he told you? Nothing is over. It will never be over, not until the last star dies for the very last time. I yelled at it, but it didn't answer. He never spoke to me again, which is rude as hell, especially when you consider that he still occasionally crawls out of the tunnel, his mirror cut, into my stomach. If you're not interested or up to date on my office drama, this part won't make sense or matter, so feel free to leave it. After that interview, I was a wreck. So I went to see Numa. Even though I didn't particularly want to invite him, Christoph looked almost as sick as I felt. So I asked him to come along. He declined. So I set off alone. Numa was my first patient, and still one of my favorites. I don't talk to him often because he just doesn't like talking, but I interview him about once a month, and I feel like we're making slow progress. Unbeknownst to me, the agency recently acquired an injured puma cub. Yesterday, they had me present it to Numa. Long story short, they're getting along famously. Numa's already named her cub. I watched them play for a while, then went back upstairs, as is typical these days. Mikey was waiting for me, but this time, I was finally ready for him. I immediately made eye contact and asked, "What's on your mind?" "There are 5 wards in the Pantheon." He answered quickly like they always do when I make them talk. Ward 1, where we're at, it's kind of like fancy ADSEG or federal prison. I know about both. I guess you do too, just from the opposite side of the cell door. What else? I asked. I was supposed to be A class, and you were supposed to be me sidekick. Seems redundant if you ask me. But admin really liked the idea. But I fucked it up. That's why you're stuck with Charlie. Sorry. I filed this information away for further consideration. Why do you want me to be best friends with Christoph? It's hard to explain, but the best way I can put it is Mikey put up a shield. Not enough to stop me from compelling him to answer, but enough to tell the truth without telling the whole truth. Because he's a company man for a company that holds in contempt. He gets punished when he obeys, and punished when he doesn't. He needs is for C. I waited, trying to figure out what to say to make him look at me. Once he looked at me, I could make him talk. About what? I didn't know, but I figured it would come to me, like it always did. Finally, I asked him about the mirror shards. Didn't they ever ask you to, track them down? They did. Couldn't you? Of course I could. I told them I couldn't. That made me laugh. I can't say I'm grateful for much here, but I'm pretty grateful to not have to worry about getting sliced up by pieces of a magic mirror. And that's all thanks to you. It is. My patience died. Christoph, look at me. He did. What do they do to you downstairs? I felt that same sense of deflection I'd gotten from Mikey, of telling the truth, but not all of it. They make me into what they need. What do they need? A vicious dog who does bad things for his bad rewards, his face contorted, not terribly, but just enough to compromise the humanity in it. His eyes took on the mirror-like shine that I despised. You don't have to make me talk to you. I will answer what you ask. Okay. Even though I didn't want to, I went over and stood beside him. He tensed up. I couldn't help but wonder what he was afraid of. Then tell me, what do they do? I never remember, only that it hurts very much during, and that I feel very good after. When we first met, and I made you frightened, when I liked how it felt to make you frightened. They had just finished with me. Their work was supposed to last a long time, but it lasted a very short time. They are unhappy, and they think it's your fault. I have told them it is not. I have told them you and I do not even get along. We kind of do, though. If we got along, you would not look at me and see only teeth. I didn't know what to say. Do not feel sorry. You are right to see what you see. We stood in silence for a moment. Then he said, I have not always done bad things for bad rewards. I have done the right thing sometimes, but always too late. And the right thing does not matter if you do it too late. I felt a twinge of instinct that made me want to recoil from him and from myself, but knew I had to follow it if I wanted any kind of positive outcome. So before I could think about it, or rather, think myself out of it, I put a hand on his shoulder. He tensed up again. That's probably true, I said. But the fact that you can think that far about it still puts you way ahead of all the other staff here. I can see that just as clearly as I see your teeth. Is there anything I can do or say to keep them from hauling you downstairs? Yes, you can stop whatever this is. With that, he shrugged me off and stalked away. I won't lie. It was a relief to see him go. He won't be gone for long, though, because I just got next week's interview schedule, and he's still assigned to attend each and every one. I hope that means they're not planning on taking him downstairs anytime soon. Partly because I don't really want anyone to hurt him, and partly because I have the feeling he's the only person here who will talk to me about all the different wards. I guess all I can do is wait and see. I think I'm overworked. All right, listen up, Sean called out, slapping his palms against the nearest cubicle wall with a sharp thwack. His tie was loose, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. Management says we're behind on the quarterly projections, he continued, dragging out the word management like it physically hurt him. So congratulations. We've won a glamorous evening of spreadsheets, client calls, and whatever's left of the coffee in the break room. Fantastic, Mia muttered from her desk, propping her chin on her hand. She twirled a pen absently, her brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Just what I wanted for Christmas. At least we'll be celebrating together, Ryan added, flashing one of his trademark grins. He had perched himself on the edge of my desk, fiddling with his perfectly knotted tie. I glanced at the clock. 8:47 p.m. The big digital numbers were glowing red against the off-white walls. I sighed, letting my eyes wander towards the window. Just outside, the city was a beautiful blur of frost-covered buildings and blinking traffic lights. Snowflakes were gently tapping against the glass. Sophia spoke up. Are we seriously doing this? She was leaning back in her chair with her arms crossed, her dark eyeliner smudged slightly from rubbing her eyes. Didn't they just push this deadline up again last week? Corporate wants what corporate wants, Sean replied, throwing up his hands in surrender, and we don't really get a vote on it. Speak for yourself, Arjun piped up from a nearby cubicle. I've got tickets to the Packers game tomorrow. No chance I'm staying late and missing it. Dream big, Arjun, Mia teased, her lips quirking up into a half smile. We'll be lucky if we get out of here before midnight. Behind me, the printer sputtered to life with a mechanical whir click. It began spitting out pages slowly, as if it was resentful for the extra work. I grabbed the fresh stack of hot paper, thumbing through them before handing them off to Sophia. I yawned and returned back to my desk. You're quiet tonight, Ryan said, nudging me softly with his elbow. You good? Just tired, I replied, my voice heavier than I intended. Feels like we've already been here forever. Because we have, Mia said, standing up to stretch. Her chair slid away in protest. Seriously, what time is it? Is it still Monday? It's Tuesday, Sean called out without looking up from his laptop. Welcome to the future. By 9:30, the break room was running low on coffee, and the Aborba vending machine had officially eaten its third dollar bill of the night. This thing's a scam, muttered Daniel, kicking the vending machine with a dull thunk. He was the newest hire, still full of the kind of naive frustration the rest of us had long since buried. Seriously, how is this even legal? Consider it your initiation, Sophia said, smirking. Everyone loses money to that thing, at least once. Twice if you're me, I added, earning a laugh from Mia. Skrrr. Chunk. The sound of the printer jamming brought all of our conversations to a halt. We all turned to look at it, as if we were expecting it to apologize for the interruption. Sean sighed dramatically and pushed back his chair. Of course it jams now. Why not? He stomped over, yanking open the printer tray with a sharp clack. Geez, who was printing War and Peace? It was me, Arjun admitted, sheepishly, raising a hand. Client files. They wanted physical copies of everything. I didn't realize it was, well, that much. Dude, this isn't 1998, Sean shot back, tugging at a crumpled wad of paper jammed deep in the machine. Tell them to use a PDF. As Sean wrestled with the printer, Mia turned to me, leaning on the edge of my desk. So, she said, smirking, what's your bet? Is Sean going to fix it, or is he going to make it worse? I give it 5 minutes. Before he wakes up IT, I said, matching her smirk. Hey, I heard that, Sean called over his shoulder. And for the record, I'm very close to fixing it. Just as he said it, the printer groaned loudly and spat out a mangled page covered in black streaks. Sean posed, holding it up like a trophy. See? Progress. Mia shook her head. I'm still going with makes it worse. The joking helped, even if only for a moment, just as Sean moved on to fiddling with the toner cartridge. The overhead lights flickered once, then twice. A faint buzzing filled the air, and everyone looked up instinctively. Old building, Sophia muttered, rolling her eyes. You'd think with the rent they charge for this place, they could afford to keep the lights on. I think it adds character, Ryan quipped. He leaned back in his chair, balancing precariously on the 2 rear legs. Awesome, Daniel said. My new workplace has character. Within a few moments, the lights eventually steadied. I need some coffee, Mia announced. Anyone else? Please, I said, and grab me one of those protein bars from the cabinet, if there's any left. Please, and thanks. I'm on it. Mia gave a small 2-finger salute before heading off towards the break room. Sean finally stepped back from the printer, his hands covered in black toner smudges. Okay, we're back in business, he declared, pressing the power button. The machine beeped once, then twice, before spewing out a single, blank page. Once again, progress, Sean said with a grin. The break room door creaked open, and Mia poked her head out, holding up an empty coffee pot. Okay, who's the monster that left this empty and didn't start a new one? Sophia raised her hand. Guilty. Sorry. I didn't think we'd still be here this late. Well, now I'm suffering for your crimes, Mia said, disappearing. Back into the break room. A few minutes later, Mia returned, carrying a steaming mug. She tossed me a knock-off multigrain bar. Right when I caught it, the office phone on Sean's desk rang. We all paused, exchanging glances. Sean frowned, picking it up. Hello? Nope. No one here by that name. Wrong number. He hung up, shaking his head. Who even calls an office? Landline this late? Telemarketers. Probably, Daniel offered. Or ghosts, Ryan said, in a mock spooky voice, wiggling his fingers. But the phone rang again, this time at Sophia's desk. She stared at it for a moment before picking up. Hello? What? Sorry, I think you have the wrong number. She hung up quickly, her expression uneasy. That was weird. Same thing, someone asking for a name I didn't recognize. Maybe it's the client, Arjun suggested. They probably screwed up and sent the files to the wrong department. It's not even one of our numbers, Sophia said, holding up the receiver. The tiny display screen showed a string of Okay, who's messing with us? Sean began waving the paper around like it was evidence in a trial. Come on, This has an office prank written all over it. Wait, something's wrong, Arjun said, his voice unusually quiet. He was staring at his monitor, his fingers hovering above the keyboard. What do you mean, wrong? Ryan asked, leaning over his desk. My screen just froze, Arjun replied, gesturing at his monitor. But it's not like a regular crash. Look, we all crowded around him, peering at his screen. There wasn't an error message, but his desktop monitor had turned completely black. Every few seconds, a faint, flickering static line ran across the monitor like an old television set. Is it the network? Sophia asked, glancing at her own screen. Before Arjun could answer, her computer screen blinked in response. Then it followed suit. Her monitor displayed more faint, writhing static lines. All right, now I'm officially freaked out, Sophia said, backing away from her desk. One by one, the monitors across the office started being filtered by white noise and static lines. Seriously, what the hell is going on? Daniel's voice cracked. Power surge, maybe? Mia suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. Power's still on, Sean pointed out. The lights are fine. This feels more like, I don't know, a hack? Who would hack us? Ryan said, looking incredulous. We're not exactly high rollers. Okay, I don't care what anyone says, Daniel muttered, grabbing his bag. I'm out. This is too weird. Sit down, Sean snapped, his frustration flaring. You can't just bail. We still have to finish this project. Finish? Daniel gestured around the room. The computers are fried. How exactly are we supposed to finish anything? Sean opened his mouth to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He looked toward the far side of the office, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion. Wait, where's the exit? Sean asked, his voice soft. What do you mean? Where's the exit? Mia said, turning to look. The glass doors leading to the elevators and stairwell were gone. In their place was a smooth, featureless wall that blended seamlessly with the rest of the office. No way, I whispered, standing up and walking toward where the doors should have been. My fingers brushed against the wall. This can't be right. Let's check out the emergency exit, Sean said, his tone soft, nearly silent. We wandered toward the red-lit exit sign in the corner, but when we reached it, the door beneath it was gone too. Just another seamless wall. What the actual hell is happening? Mia asked. Sean pounded on the wall where the door should have been. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was dull with no indication there was any empty space behind it. The windows, Sophia murmured, her eyes scanning the office. There should be windows here. Where are the windows? She was right. The large windows that normally lined the east side of the office were gone, replaced by more of that smooth, featureless surface. Okay. Deep breaths, Ryan said, holding up his hands. Let's not jump to conclusions. There's got to be an explanation for this. Yeah? Like what? Daniel shot back. The room felt colder, the faint hum of the AC now joined by an occasional crackle, like static electricity building in the air. I walked back to my desk, instinctively reaching for my phone. It was dead, the screen just as black as the monitors. Anyone else's phone working? I asked. A chorus of murmurs followed as everyone checked their devices. Nothing. No power. No signal. Just dead. This doesn't make sense. Arjun muttered. Buildings don't just change. We need to stay calm, Ryan said, though his voice wavered slightly. Like I said, there's got to be a logical explanation. Maybe It's what? Mia asked, incredulous. Ryan, we've worked here for 3 years. The walls don't just zert. The sound ripped through the air like a live wire, making us all jump. It came from the printer again. Slowly, we all turned to look. The top tray sputtered out a fresh page, crisp and white. Sean hesitated, then stepped forward to grab it. His face went pale as he read the single word printed on it. Stay. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the lights flickered again, plunging the room into brief darkness before snapping back on. Okay, Sean said. Something's wrong. Is this some kind of joke? Sophia broke the silence, her voice tight. Who's doing this? Nobody's doing it, Mia said, pacing. You saw what happened to the doors, to the windows. That isn't... It's not possible. Yeah? Well, it feels pretty damn real to me, Daniel snapped, slinging his bag over his shoulder. I'm not waiting around to find out what happens next. Where are you going? Ryan asked, stepping in front of him. Daniel hesitated, the weight of Ryan's words settling in. He glanced around the office, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional tick-tick-tick of an analog clock pressed somewhere against the far wall. Then what do we do? He asked, his voice softer. We stay calm, Ryan said, though his eyes betrayed him. We figure this out together. A sudden metallic clang echoed from somewhere deep within the office. Did you hear that? Sophia whispered. Yeah, I said, my throat dry. It sounded like it came from the conference room. Sean grabbed a heavy stapler off a desk. All right, stay here. I'll check it out. You're not going alone, Mia said firmly, picking up a large paperweight. Fine, Sean said, glancing around. Anyone else? Ryan and I exchanged a look before stepping forward. Strength in numbers, right? Ryan said, forcing a weak smile. The four of us moved cautiously toward the conference room, our footsteps muffled by the cheap carpet. Sean reached the door first and pushed it open with the stapler. The door swung inward with a low creak. Anything? Mia whispered. Sean stepped inside, squinting in the dim light. He tried to flip the light switch, but nothing happened. I don't. The overhead projector flickered to life with a pop, casting a faint blue glow across the room. Static filled the screen, accompanied by the familiar, high-pitched whine of an old tape spinning. What the hell? Sean muttered, looking towards the projection. The static on the screen resolved into a grainy image of a man sitting at a desk. He was dressed in 1970s office attire, his wide tie crooked, his hair disheveled. His hands were trembling as he typed on a clunky typewriter. His face was pale and drawn, dark circles hollowing his eyes. On the desk beside him, a bottle of pills lay spilled, its contents scattered. We watched in horrified silence as the man reached for the bottle, his movements sluggish. He hesitated, his fingers trembling, before tipping the pills into his hand. The image froze as he raised them to his mouth. Was that? Ryan began, but his voice trailed off. The screen flickered again, and a new image appeared. A woman wearing an 80s suit. It rested stark against her petite frame. She was sitting in the break room, her head in her hands. A cup of coffee sat untouched. In front of her, the steam curling upward As the camera zoomed in, we saw her tears streaking her heavily rouged cheeks. She stood suddenly, opened the cabinet, and retrieved a bottle of cleaning chemicals. The screen froze as she unscrewed the cap. "Oh my God," Mia whispered, covering her mouth. The projector clicked again, this time showing a man the office knew, John Stevens. His desk was cluttered with energy drink cans and takeout containers. He stared blankly at a glowing monitor, the bags under his eyes almost purple. He raised a box cutter, his hands shaking, and pressed it to his wrist. The screen froze, just as the blade bit into his skin. These are people who worked here," Sophia mumbled. "I knew John. Our office was closed for a week. After the projector whined, the images blurring together before the final one appeared. It was the office as we knew it, but something moved at the far end of the room. The creature ignored her. With a grinding mechanical whir, it plunged the jagged wires into Sophia's chest. Blood sprayed across the desk as she screamed, her back arching in agony. The wires pulsed and twisted, snaking their way under her skin. Her fingers clawed at the air, twitching as her body convulsed violently. "Do something," Mia cried, tears streaming down her face. Sean stammered, still clutching the stapler in his trembling hands. "I don't—" Sophia's screams stopped abruptly. Her body went limp, her eyes wide and glassy. For a moment, I thought she was dead. But then, the thing let her go. After a few seconds, her body began sputtering. Her movements were stiff and jerky. Her head lolled unnaturally to the side and looked at us. Her mouth opened, and a garbled, static-laden voice emerged. "Stay with us." "No," Mia whispered, backing away. "Oh my God, no." The creature turned toward the group, the green light in its head flickering rapidly. Sophia, if it was still Sophia, stood up beside it, her movements eerily synchronized with the creature's. The cables and wires from the computer tower were sparking faintly from her chest as she stepped forward. "Run!" Sean shouted, grabbing Mia's arm and pulling her toward the nearest cubicle. The office descended into chaos. People scattered in every direction. Arjun was the only one left frozen in place. The creature saw him and let out another piercing screech, its claws whipping through the air as it lurched forward. Arjun tried to duck, but the creature's claw caught his leg, sending him sprawling onto the floor. "Help!" he cried, clawing at the carpet as the creature dragged him backward. "No!" Ryan shouted, grabbing a chair and hurling it at the creature. It hit the thing's angular head with a loud clang, but the creature didn't even seem to notice. Its claws dug into Arjun's torso, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. It slammed him onto a desk and began tearing apart another computer. We didn't wait to see what happened next. Sean, Mia, Ryan and I ducked behind a row of cubicles. "What do we do?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't just leave them." "We can't fight that thing," Sean hissed. "We can't just—" Mia's voice broke as Arjun's screams echoed through the office, followed by a grotesque squelch as his flesh began to be rearranged. I peeked over the edge of the cubicle. I saw the creature's claws move with mechanical focus as it fused Arjun's body to the shattered remains of a monitor. Blood dripped onto the desk, pooling around the tangled mess of cables and broken glass. Arjun's head twitched violently, his eyes rolling back into his skull. When his mouth opened, a distorted voice spilled out. "Stay." I ducked back, down, my stomach churning. "It's—" A loud bang cut me off. We all turned toward the sound. Daniel had grabbed a fire extinguisher and was swinging it wildly. "Come on, you son of a bitch," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. The creature snapped its head towards the young man, its crack flaring open, exposing its gnarled teeth-like protrusions. It moved fast, its clawed hand slicing through the air with a sharp whoosh. Daniel's voice was cut short as the claws tore through his side. "Move," Sean pleaded, shoving us toward the far side of the office. "We need to keep moving." We scrambled over overturned chairs and scattered papers. The sounds of the creature's claws tearing through flesh echoed behind us. As we rounded a corner, I took one final glance back. The creature stood in the center of the office, its ink-stained claws dripping as it loomed over Daniel's lifeless body. The twisted forms of Sophia and Arjun flanked it, their movements stiff and unnatural, their mouths repeating the same garbled phrase, "Stay, stay, stay." I refocused on my friends, our hearts pounding as we pressed forward. "This way," Sean barked, leading us toward the far side of the conference rooms. "We can't keep running," Mia cried, clutching her side. Sean skidded to a stop. He looked almost feral, but when he saw Mia, his face softened. "You're right. You guys keep moving down the hallway." "What are you talking about?" Ryan snapped. "I'm not saying I'll fight it," Sean said, his voice low, "but I'll lead it away. You three, find another way out. There's gotta be something." "No," Mia shouted, grabbing his arm. "We're not splitting up. That's insane." Sean pried her hand off. "Listen to me. We don't all get out of this unless someone slows it down. I can do that. I'll put my old track star talent to some good use." "Sean, don't—" I started, but the words died in my throat as a piercing screech cut through the air. The creature rounded the far corner, its warped form illuminated by the green flicker of its head. "Go!" Sean shouted, shoving Ryan toward the next hallway. "Now! Sean!" Mia screamed, tears streaming down her face as Ryan dragged her away. I hesitated, torn between run. "Ants could get in through there," she explained. "When I brought Grandma Vi her groceries, they had to undergo a period of disinfecting, in which they were double-bagged in black trash bags and sealed for 2 days. This," Vi reasoned, "would suffocate any insects that might be passengers inside the lettuce or the cornflake boxes. No sugar, obviously. Ants loved sugar. I tried not to eat. In front of Vi, the day I spent as her full-time caretaker, I unwrapped an egg sandwich in front of her, and it sent her into a panic attack. 'You're dropping crumbs all over the floor,' she screamed. I wasn't. And even if I was, it's not like the floor could get any dirtier. Vi would not let me vacuum, because I did it wrong. Vi didn't vacuum either. She couldn't. Just walking around the house left her fatigued. Her hair had always been long and thick, but it was so hard for her to care for now that she'd had it shaved near to the scalp. She'd struggle to lift anything heavier than a spoon. I reminded myself of that daily Grandma V was a sick, dying old woman. She was in pain. She was used to independence and solitude. This was the worst she'd ever felt. and the most disempowered she had ever been. And importantly, my dad was paying me to do this because someone had to. So I tried not to hate her guts, and I ate my meals outside on the picnic table in what used to be her garden. Even in the winter, I refrained from cleaning without her permission. I never, ever used the front door. The front door could let in ants. The ant obsession, I never found out where that came from. My dad just shrugged it off as one more drop in a giant bucket of assorted mental illnesses. She's been getting worse ever since Grandpa Joe passed, Dad said to me over the phone while I called him. Crying in my car one day, Vi's husband had been gone since before I was born. If there was a tolerable version of her, I never met it. Grandma Vi relied on him. When your mom was growing up, Vi was actually a very quiet, mellow person. She was never nice, but she felt safe. She had security. She didn't feel like she had to go on the attack all the time. I hated imagining my mom as a child in this horrible house. Your Grandpa Joe was a nice person, Dad said. Not like her at all. I believe that missing him is a big part of what made her crazy. I didn't argue with him, but I didn't think he was right, because in Grandma Vi's Halloween-haunted house of traps and poison, every single photo of Grandpa Joe, a tall, dark, handsome man with a very kind smile, had been turned backwards to face the wall. The first month I was there was quiet. Then the scratching started. It sounded like a raccoon climbing around on the roof and walls. Every time I thought it was done, it started up again. It was the deep of night, and I couldn't sleep. I slipped out of the attic bed, where Vi still expected me to sleep, and climbed the ladder down to the main floor. There was a porch light outside. I hoped it would scare away any animals. But as I started unlocking the back door, a sharp, cold hand grabbed my arm. I jumped. Vi was there, her dark eyes wide, her wrinkled face pulled tightly into a mask of pure terror. "Don't open the door," she hissed. "I'm just turning the light on," I said. I unlatched the door. Vi screamed, and I felt a sudden hot pain across my face. I put my fingers to my cheek and felt blood. Vi had scratched me. I swore, and she relatched the door. I ran to the bathroom to wash my new cuts out in the clogged sink. When I found Vi again, she was in bed. She wasn't sleeping, though, and she definitely wasn't sorry. "If you attack me again, I'm leaving," I said to her. "You ought to be grateful," Vi said. "You don't even know what you almost did. Stupid." I refrained from calling her the names I was thinking of calling her in my head. I swallowed those teeth and asked, "What did I almost do?" Vi laughed. "You were just going to let in those ants." In Vi's house, I was never to leave the house at night. I was never to open the back door at night. I was never to open the front door at all. I was never, under any circumstances, to let anyone else inside the house. The scratching would come every few nights. Once it started, Vi finally started asking me to fix things around the house. She didn't let me clean, but she did make me go up on the roof and look for holes, nests, anywhere ants could be living or trying to get in. And for once, to her credit, I did find some damage. It looked like termites, maybe. I sprayed bug killer and sealed up the chewed spots. One day, Vi screamed at the top of her lungs in the middle of the night. I ran into her room to find her frantically springing from her bed. She collapsed into a dresser and knocked over the stack of paper plates she kept there, sanitized with bleach. She was staring at the window with pure horror. I didn't see anything out there. She wouldn't tell me what S. I was taken aback. Have you seen him? I asked. No, but the ants have. They've seen him, and they know what he looks like. And I've seen the ants. Vi would deteriorate a little bit at a time, and then a lot at once. When I started, I wondered if we'd develop some sort of closeness over time. That was a very silly idea. The more Vi needed me, the less she could stand me. She would snip at me and scream at me. The first time she needed my help in the bathroom, I was punished for helping her with a long string of insults and criticism, which, at this point, I had learned to tune out. I brought her a bowl of corn flakes in a paper plate in bed. She commanded me to spray her stacks of paper plates with bleach while she ate. I don't think that's safe, I said. She shot me a dagger glare. You want ants in here? She said. I just think this is an unventilated room, and it's not safe to spray bleach all over everything. Vi responded to this by throwing her bowl of cornflakes at me. Cereal splashed all over the floor. Milk soaked into my sweater and my hair. That's it, I said. I took my wet sweater off. I changed pants. I took the vacuum cleaner out of its dusty closet. Vi screamed and screamed at me as I cleaned up the mess. I took all of the paper plates and put them in garbage bags. I took down the flypaper. I threw the empty borax boxes in the dumpster. Vi couldn't do anything but sob while I took over the house. When I got thirsty, I set my cup down on the table without a coaster. I was worried the neighbors were going to call the cops with all the yelling and crying going on, but no one did. Once, I looked out the window and saw a dark man in dark clothes standing on the sidewalk across from the house. I couldn't see his eyes under his cap, but I thought he was looking at me. There was something familiar and disturbing about him, which I couldn't place, and then he was just gone. I looked away for a second, and he had disappeared. The sun went down. I came into Vi's room with her dinner and her pills. You hate me, she glared. You really, really hate me? I must deserve it. Vi, I cleaned your house. You're gonna let in those ants? If ants get in, we'll just stomp them. Listen, I'm not gonna live here and help you if I can't live in this house. Then you better let me die. She scowled at me. I rolled my eyes. There was a scratching sound at the front door. Vi jumped and pulled the blanket up, like a child afraid of the dark. I stood up to go see the source of the noise. Get back. Here, Vi shouted. I'm just seeing what it is, I said. You stupid bitch. Get back here. Vi screamed louder as I walked up the hall to the front door. The scratches sounded heavy, huge, not like a raccoon at all, but something bigger. For a second, I had a sudden, irrational thought. It was that man I saw before. It was that tall man with the cap, and when I opened the door, I thought I would see him standing there, his uncannily and unplaceably familiar face grinning at me, and his teeth would be black, and his eyes dark and gleaming. I got scared. My fingers stopped on the latch. I flipped on the front porch light. I peeked through the hole. Of course there was no man. It was a dog, a big black lab. He had a collar around his neck. He scratched the door again, tail wagging. I hadn't seen this dog around the neighborhood before, but to be fair, I hadn't been able to get out very much in the past few months. It could very well be a neighbor dog. He was big, but he looked skinny. His dark coat shined slick in the porch light. I unlocked the front door. The dog looked at me through the screen, its glittering dark eyes docile. "Hi," I said to the dog. The dog wagged its tail slowly. "Are you lost?" The dog didn't whine or bark, but only pawed at the door again. Vi would never, in a million billion years, let me help this dog. But Vi wasn't in charge anymore, so I opened the door. I only meant to step outside and check his collar, but the moment the door was open, the big black dog strode into the house. Not a Labrador, I realized. Maybe some kind of Great Pyrenees mix. It was big, huge even. It crossed the threshold, and I swore it seemed to grow. Not a Pyrenees, a Dane. As the dog brushed past me, I reached my hand down to pet his dark coat. My fingers passed through something grainy, crunchy, and moving, something which slithered in rivers around my fingers. Millions of tiny legs, chitinous, feathery, pinching. Not a Dane, not a dog. The creature didn't move right as it lurched down the hall. The legs bent wrong. The body writhed. It moved quickly, with purpose. I was too shocked to move. The dog thing swelled up into an enormous, amorphous mass and flooded into Grandma Vi's bedroom, where she was already screaming. I ran to her. I did hate her, but I ran to her. Maybe I meant to help her. Maybe I just wanted to see. Either way, by the time I got there was nearly nothing left of Grandma Vi but a thrashing corpse. I couldn't tell when the wild flailing stopped being her death throes and started being purely the erratic undulations and tossings and turnings of millions of tiny black ants moving her bones. They crawled all over the floor. They crawled all over the ceiling. They crawled over my arms and legs, not biting, just moving over me on their way to and from her. I turned and fled the house. The ants didn't follow me. They were far too engrossed in dismantling their quarry. I really didn't know. How could I? Vi never told me. She expected me to just know. My grandmother just confessed to a sinister war story that happened to all the soldiers in training. Dead. It was the worst disaster to happen to me. "Do you have everything, Claire?" he shouted as he locked the front door and began to trot towards the car. "Yes, I have everything except battery." I deeply sighed as I peered at my blank phone, then out of the window. The door opened beside me as he climbed in and closed it. With a small chuckle, he then replied, "Well, now you have the whole journey to talk with me. How about that?" The orange and pink streaks were dragged along the sky like paint on a canvas. I noticed the silence amongst us, my eyes dragging itself to sleep, but at the same time, my mind raced with annoyance and confusion. Biting my lip, I watched the view change. So did the atmosphere that surrounded me. "Julian," I trailed off as his right hand tightened around the steering wheel. He then did a small hum, staring in front of the road ahead of us. "I don't get the point. I mean, come on. Why are we doing the—" "Enough," he shot harshly as he flicked the small black button and a delicate tune resonated out the radio. I propped my head up against the window and looked out at the houses that now flew by us. It was every Saturday morning. where I found myself driving with Julian, but it was as if he didn't realize things anymore. I managed to sit comfortably and shut my eyes for a few moments until I was woken up by a sharp jolt of the car, and he gently tapped my shoulder. I glanced at the white cottage that tucked itself behind the tall green trees that swayed with the wind. The home sat on its own, away from civilian life. The crystalline window stared into me as I opened the car door. The sharp grass beneath my feet pricked me. It was reminding us that we were here, and we could quickly leave now. Julian followed my movements after me. Locking the car, we both gave each other a look and started to walk towards the old white gate that wrapped around the entire home. The garden filled with pink roses and yellow tulips that glared at us as we strolled towards the white door. Remember, no phone, and do not ask for anything. You hear me? He sternly commanded as I nodded quickly, trying to dismiss the wooden platform beneath us that constantly creaked in disturbance. Knock, knock, knock. A faint cluttering sound came from the door handle, and then it gradually opened. There she was. The lines on her face was like a map of time stretched out, meeting with the strands of curly gray hair that laid evenly on the top of her head in a bun. Eyes danced upon us as a charming smile rose from her beautiful cheeks that showed her dimples. "Hello, Grandma. How are you?" I asked politely as I leaned in for a hug. "I am quite all right, dear. You?" Her sweet voice flowed into my ears as she gave me a soft kiss on the cheek and allowed us in. The smell of freshly baked cookies eased the tension that I had previously felt. Come in, come in, darlings. Sit in this room," Grandma offered us as we walked through the hallway and into the large living room. The living room had a large glass cabinet that stored heaps, books that were older than me inside. Mountains and scenery were drawn and framed as paintings. Each turn you took they hung up neatly on the wall. My eyes transfixed onto the pile of paperwork that was messily strewn across the wooden table in front of me. I finally sat down on her sofa that pulled me deeper inside with every small movements to archive a comfortable position. She gradually walked towards the living room, holding a plate of cookies and an old tatty book in her other hand. "Where's Francis?" Julian asked immediately as she placed the plate on the table and slowly began to sit down at the single sofa chair. "He's currently at the market buying some apricots that I love." Grandma. "Oh, Grandma, do you have—" "Claire, would you like some of my oat biscuits?" Grandma offered as I glared at the dry biscuits and eventually gave in, delicately taking one from the plate and nibbling down on it. Grandma held the Abi book in her arms as if she was guarding it with her life. I noticed Julian staring out at the window. The sun dipped beneath the grassy hills that were sound asleep. The small birds hopped from one branch to another, then fluttered away from the jarring wind that poked and prided the area. I turned to Grandma, her worn hands now turning the pages of a small book that I couldn't work out what it was. The comforting silence swept through the old cottage as a sharp thought treaded in my mind. "What are you reading?" I questioned in a curious tone as I felt a pair of annoyed eyes trace up my body. "Ooh, it's an old story, rather peculiar," Grandma whispered as I felt my heart flip with excitement. I needed something to cure the boredom I feel every Saturday. couldn't stand the thought of sitting and waiting till tea arrived. "What's it about?" I asked, more curious than ever, as she turned the page to the start of the book and handed it to me. "Claire," Julian trailed off as I huffed and took the old book in my hands, the smooth leathery case tucked inside my palms as I admired the small engravings of unknown symbols and words. "Would you like to know a little secret about Grandpa Francis?" she asked with a smile, as I nodded eagerly as Julian rose from his seat and came next to me. "Doris, we talked about this," he snapped as he tried to take the book from my hands, but I swerved it away. I opened the book. I assumed it was going to be a prehistoric tale or a gruesome folklore to warn children, but it was a medium-sized Polaroid photo that was evenly stuck inside the first page. "That is Francis when he was young." Grandma chuckled as my immediate question was answered hastily. The teenage boy held a small rifle cradled in his arms. He had a flock of brown hair that was neatly brushed to one side. His eyes were narrowed with a chilling, dead glare at the camera. Young Francis wore a green camouflaged shirt and trousers with thick, black boots. He stood behind a cobblestone wall. The sky was bright and everything was normal. However, I couldn't help but feel a shiver trace down my spine as my eyes were drawn to his face. "Let me tell you about my Francis before he comes home, darling." Grandma beamed as she took the book from my hands and cleared her throat and said, "We were still together, trying to figure out our lives after our newborn died years earlier. That was when he had to enlist. Soon enough, he had to leave for thorough training." "State your name, Private," the chubby man ordered, as a young man walked to the table and replied, "Francis, Francis Iverson," the male stated with a soft smile as he stood upright, carrying his backpack on his shoulders and a book in his hands. "Straight through the hall go, outside, and find the second large wooden bunk, where you will be staying," the man lazily said as he pointed at the glass door. The young male pushed the door open. His mouth was agape as he looked upon the grassy wide fields that stretched out far beyond. He looked at the young men that ran laps around the paved tracks, climb walls whilst clenching the ropes with all their strengths. He could hear the distant yelling of men ordering the other soldiers to climb faster up the wall as he began to slowly trot to his barrack. The wooden bunker sat further away from where he was originally walking. Many of these bunkers were spread out meters apart. As his eyes lingered upon the very few men heading into the bunker he was currently going to, the metal door was already propped open as he stepped in nervously. Before he could utter a single word, a young man rushed towards him. "Hey, we got a new recruit." The man snickered as he wrapped his arm around Francis tightly, as if he was wrestling with him. A group of men stared at Francis, taking in his appearance, checking if he was a good enough soldier. "Oi, you, what's your name?" A rough voice broke the silence as another person approached Francis rudely. The man had short, curly brown hair that was neatly trimmed to a standard. His light brown eyes were narrowed, glaring at the boy who stood cluelessly in the doorway. "Francis Iverson." The man who wrapped his arm around the boy slightly moved away and sat on his bed watching. "You can't stay here, the bunk is full. Try somewhere else." The soldier coldly grunted, the room becoming more intense, as Iverson let out an awkward chuckle. What do you mean?" I was assigned here, he blurted as the other young man clenched his fists. But before anyone could say a thing, a loud knock resonated the room. You lot, I told you to be down there in 5 minutes. What's taking so long? A slim, tensed man was standing at the doorway. He wore the U.S. Hey, Iverson, wait up, a fellow soldier called, making Francis turn around and smile. Hey, you must be Charles. Charles Everett, at your service, mocked the young boy with a grin, making Francis chuckle, easing the aches. He felt in every limb of his body. The boy had smooth blonde hair that parted to one side of his head, his shiny blue eyes, and a relaxed expression that plastered across his face. The two men introduced themselves better, chattered about their training and the tense atmosphere that Francis had experienced. What's up with that guy anyway? Francis spoke quietly as they were a few steps away from their bunk. Oh, I don't know him that well, but some bloke told me he's a spiteful guy. Don't worry about it, Charles calmly reassured the worried boy as he patted Francis's back and glided through the other soldiers that were in front of them rapidly. You see, my Francis trained for a while. They learned many things about their weapons and combat skills, but there was a day that was, well, different. Grandma continued. Her eyes, that previously danced with excitement, were dark and jittered across the room. It was within a week before Francis knew the proper ways to hold his bayonet and his warm-ups to exceed his strengths. He knew training was going to be difficult, especially when his muscles groaned day by day, but he carried on. The soldiers were seated in their bunks, ready for the evening when the sergeant stormed into their room. He held his nose up high, eyes moving across the paper rapidly, before he glared at each of them sternly. All of your routines have changed. Tomorrow, you will be seated in the meeting room, he commanded, as all the soldiers stopped moving their duvet sheets around, and with a puzzling look, they stared back at the sergeant. Sir, may I ask why? Piped one of the soldiers that was lying down on his bed. Francis was also thinking the same question, holding his small leather book clutched in his hand. This is training. Do not think that all of you will have a day off. And with that, the sergeant disappeared into the night with a loud bang from the metal door. It was a bright morning. The soldiers had to walk far out from where they previously trained into this large white building where the meetings were held. The sergeant led them into a room with a small television and many seats placed in rows. The tables stored at the back of this room. All the blinds were shut. Now listen here. You will have to watch a video on this television. This will help with your techniques on the battlefield, added the slim man as the young soldiers sat down on the seats, confused. It was not like anything before. They were glued to their seats, the videos flashing quickly as each of the soldiers' eyes were transfixed onto the blaring screen. Most normal people would call that torture clips, but everyone else named it special training. The special training lasted for weeks. Each video they watched was different. Screaming and crying of men or women, even children, as they went through a sickening experience that no one could process. Then they went back to their bunks in silence. Hey, Francis, what's up with you there? You looked shit scared. The soldiers trudged to their barrack as Francis heard a chuckle behind him. The young man felt disturbed. He could not wrap his mind around the special training. Yes, they are going to protect their country from the enemy, but torturing them wasn't his intention. I'm not scared. It's just not normal for us to watch something so appalling. Francis coolly replied, What? You think bringing a gun is going to stop something? This is what we are here for, Iverson. The man shot as Francis stood next to his bed, whilst the other boy lingered almost a meter away from him. That isn't true. What? You calling me a liar? Didn't say that. Wait, boys. Iverson thinks that watching those clips isn't part of the training. What's the point of you even enlisting? You're a fucking sissy. Can't you leave me alone? What the heck is wrong with you? The stench of trepidation and anger seeped into the bunker. What followed after it was the noise of pounding of multiple fists and kicking. It wouldn't stop. They wouldn't stop. That was when the metal door opened and the sergeant stood there. Francis shouted and yelled at the sergeant, but to his dismay, the slim man slowly shut the door. The young boy's eyes widened at the cold-blooded man. He couldn't move. The blood streamed down his nose, his body beaten up by at least 5 men at once, whilst the rest of the boys watched, lacking any sympathy. What's wrong with that guy? I murmured as I tried to steady myself from the boiling rage that was bubbling inside of me. Well, don't ask me, dear. A matter of fact, ask him. Grandma trembled, shaking her head in pure disgust. I almost chuckled a little as I replied with, Grandma, you know, I can't do that. I roll. Hey, Iverson, wait up. A fellow soldier, the only good person he could talk to now, was Charles Everett. After breakfast, Francis rushed to the field, where he instantly saw the young male gradually walking towards his bunk. Hey, Everett, wait up, Francis yelled, making the man stop. In his tracks, he turned around. The young boy's eyes were bruised and puffy. His knuckles appeared to have red marks across them as they shook violently, desperately trying to hold the water bottle in his hands. The bright energy that made Charles himself was replaced by a ghastly, pale man whose face lingered with evil. My Francis did not understand what was going on. He thought he saw the worst of what he experienced. But that was just the start. Grandma trembled as she opened the first page of the book, which displayed the single Polaroid picture. The soldiers did their usual special training for the day. Each of their faces, when they trotted out of the meeting room, portrayed a sickly, empathetic glance as they strolled towards their bunks for the night. The air was fresh and welcoming as Charles and Francis walked out of the building and into the night. There was an odd silence between them. The only sound was their heavy breathing and low grunts. The destination seemed to drag on for longer as the both of them headed up the hill. That was when they first grasped it. What is that? Charles stuttered as he wiped the exhaustion from his eyes. The street lamps flickered on near them, like a domino effect, displaying the large field. The young males were stunned, their eyes drawn to what appeared to be a yellow tent propped up evenly on the side. Francis couldn't help but sense that chilling feeling creep down his spine. However, both men dismissed the unusual tent and headed back to their barracks to sleep. Bang, bang, bang. The thoughts of the tent disappeared from Francis's mind as each soldier was awoken by the banging of the sergeant on the door. All of you get up now and line up outside immediately. Hurry up, he screamed as the door slammed shut and each soldier groaned in exhaustion. The morning overcame the night very quickly. The soldiers slipped on their usual clothes and rushed outside to meet with the sergeant, who demanded them to line up in an upright formation and hold a bayonet in their hands, like they practiced. The faint sound of snapping and a flash alerted Charles as he quickly swept behind Francis. Hey, Iverson, how's it going? He greeted dryly as Francis turned around and said, I'm all right, just confused on why we are here. Well, I'm not doing what they tell me to do, like what my mama says. If something feels or tastes utterly bitter for you, don't drink it or find a way to sweeten it up. Leave it, Charles stated as he heard a chuckle from behind him. You sure your mama knows what she is talking about, Everett? Charles turned to face a smirking man as laughter resonated within the line behind him. You watch your mouth, Demetrius. Don't you talk about my mama like that. Charles spat. The rage seemed to build up piece by piece. Then he turned back to the line. Francis knew he was next in the line. Demetrius did not fear Charles. Instead, he continued to mock him. Each word or noise edged deeply into the boy. The rage fired up and up into large flames. Then, silence. Francis was next, but his eyes were focused on Charles. That grabbed the Demetrius behind him and slammed the boy onto the floor, whilst he bashed his fists into the man's face repeatedly. It was as if there was nothing left on the young bloke. No sympathy or respect, no formality, just pure violence. The scene happened so fast, but the words from the boy stuck with Francis. He couldn't take them out of his head, no matter how hard he tried. Francis couldn't move. He was detached from the world around him until the sergeant wavered his attention and he stared coldly at the camera. The noise of yelling and beating filled air. Say cheese, snap. Silence overcasted Francis's mind, the thoughts and feelings. His beautiful girlfriend that had no idea what was going on. It never bothered him because he just couldn't think, only observe. After a while, the soldiers were back to training, holding the ropes whilst climbing up the large wooden wall. They weren't good enough. They slumped and let go of the rope. The energy and the will to serve their country was the only remaining thing that bled out of their dead souls. Francis wrote a lot of things in his small leather book. He was obsessed because he knew that it was the thing that kept him sane. He wrote about the incident, and what followed after that was a series of fights and tortures. Within the night, some soldiers would go out and come back inside and provoke anyone they desired. That soldier would get beaten, and they always said the same thing, and he didn't know why, but they came along. A soft knock at the metal door that was already propped open, and a beautiful lady stood in the entrance, the sunlight seething through the gloomy room. For a moment, Francis assumed it was an angel sent down from heaven. Her soft, peachy skin and light hazel eyes that danced upon each soldier. She wore a light yellow coat with a small symbol on the side of it with her white shoes and brown, shiny long hair. Hello there, gentlemen. My name is Cornell Walters, and I am a part of a vast company that we think you would love, beamed the lady as she smiled widely, showing her pearly white teeth. There was a long silence throughout the bunk until one of the soldiers asked, What? What are you talking about? The lady peered at the grim, pale-faced men that stood there taking in this woman. Their bloodshot eyes and trembling hands. Some had bruises, scratch marks, and dried blood from cuts on their arms and body, but others barely had any visible. Well, why don't you lovelies follow me? We were in the process of packing up and leaving. However, it is a delight for all of you to catch a glimpse of it before we go, she chimed as the soldiers looked at each other confused. Francis, on the other hand, didn't hesitate to grab his book and follow this woman outside onto the field. All the weary soldiers trailed after Cornell Walters. Her hair fluttered against the soft wind that hugged each man reassuringly. They walked across the field to the large tent that had many people in the same light yellow uniform. Francis glanced at the symbol that displayed a small circle and dots that surrounded it like a sun. He couldn't keep his eyes off the equipment that they used. They had no care in the world as they gently packed the belongings in white boxes with the same symbol planted on it. Cornell Walters stopped in her tracks and watched the soldiers take in the scenery. "What do you call this company?" added one of the soldiers. All the men turned back, also pondering the same question. Before anyone could utter a word, a faint sound of engines bellowed through the field. White Morris motor cars were seen driving towards them as they parked evenly together near the working tent. The lady waved at the cars, then turned to us. With a smile that stretched wider than ever, she asked, "Would you care to join us? It will only be 2 days." The soldiers hesitated. They didn't understand what she was talking about. How could they possibly join her when they were training? But Francis didn't listen because he could detect the presence that stood next to him. It was Julian. "Uru Campa," the lady chirped at the confused but intrigued faces that peered back at her. They desired whatever this lady was offering. Some stepped forward with pride, hoping that whatever they were feeling would go away soon enough. Whatever was going on in this training facility wasn't correct, and Francis wanted to know why. He strode forward, but a tough hand tightened around his arm, the nails digging into Francis's as he turned around with a stoic expression plastered across his dull face. "Are you sure you want to go with them?" Julian shot firmly. Francis could see the arrogance that he previously witnessed before fade into a mixture of trepidation that coursed through his body. "Yeah, why not?" Francis replied bluntly, not a single emotion in his tone of voice. "Look, I know more about this than you do. I'm serious," Julian sternly whispered, as he watched the sergeant talk to the lady, whilst some of the soldiers entered the cars that silently watched the two. "What the fuck are you talking about? They are not good. Do you even know the name of this company, you dumbass?" Julian snarled, still holding Francis's arm with a tight grip as he looked away in guilt. "What do you know?" Francis hissed. It was if those words stabbed Julian like knives, clutching and tearing the only fragments of truth and honesty that remained in the young man, his eyes now staring at the soft grass and the murmuring of soldiers, each of them desperately sitting in the back of the cars that lined behind one and another. Silence. "Tell me what the fuck you're talking about," Francis repeated a bit louder than before, as he noticed fear linger in Julian's eyes. "They rupture you first to see the body's perception to a distressing event. How do you react? How do you function after it? They monitor you. Can you do a simple task without shutting the world off?" Julian couldn't move. His attention jittered to the cars and the tent that was now being taken down, then back to Francis, who had a cold glare staring back at him. He then continued, what could it exceed? Would it maximize better work from everyone across the world if they were jubilant? Think about it, Iverson. These people are testing us, and you really want to give in to that? Julian demanded. However, Francis peered back at the group of soldiers in confusion, then back at Julian. How do you know this? Francis shot. I can't tell you right now, but we got to. Francis Iverson and Julian Parker, please join us. It will be an honor to have such brilliant men. Cornell Walters smiled, holding her hands out like she was showing a famous painting to the rest of the soldiers. The lady turned back to the cars that were evenly spread out in rows. An unsettling feeling swayed into Francis as he turned back to Julian. You realize what it is like to lose a child. It's something that holds you down forever. You cannot outrun grief because it just has a way of biting back at you. Doris needs me, my girlfriend. Needs me because we are being confined every day. If there is a way to stop this suffocation, anything, then I will take it, he concluded. The breathing from Julian became more faster, more agitated. What the fuck do you mean? Did you not hear, Mum? Give this to Doris Iverson. Francis handed Julian the leathered book as he felt his grip tighten against the Huey. Man, enough to leave a mark, but he simply pulled the clutch with nothing plastered across his face. Just visit her when you can. If she worries, tell her I'll be back as soon as I can, he said, walking away towards the one of the cars and hopped in. Julian watched the cars descend from the grass and to the black metal gate that opened and closed. Gone. Silence. Where did they go? I whispered, barely hearing my own words from the repetitive drumming of my heart. Before anyone could say another word, Julian, whose fists clenched in pure rage, said, Doris, we both know that there is more to this story. How could you just sit there and not say the full details? He croaked, placing his hand on top of his gray curly hair. Claire is at that age where she needs the story on how it is supposed to be, especially when she doesn't have the parents to guide her. What did the men say? I heard myself ask, my hands trembling in my lap. What do you mean, dear? You said all of them said the same thing when they got beaten. Well, what did they say? She flipped the multiple pages of the book, then handed it to me. I touched the small old leathered book and felt a sense of dread kick in. I glimpsed at the page, my mouth agape in horror, as my eyes were drawn to Doris and Julian, then back at the book, the inevitable feeling that buried itself inside of me. My entire focus was on the two words that I somehow could not get out of my head. No, war. The motion sensor lights outside my childhood bedroom window kept turning on at night. I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood. It was one of those upbringings that wasn't particularly great, but wasn't entirely awful either. I always had a roof over my head and food to eat. But my parents could be ignorant, angry, and neglectful at times. My mother passed when I was in middle school, and while I don't remember much about the circumstances of her death, growing up with a single father caused a lot of friction when I was a teenager. There were simply a lot of little traumas built up in such a way that they bricked off a lot of memories from my younger years. Now that I am older and on my own, I've begun to seek counseling to help me overcome these things. And as I have worked through my childhood in therapy, new memories have been emerging from the recesses of my mind. I've always loved to write, and at the urging of my therapist, I've decided to recount some of these memories in order to help myself understand them and to perhaps draw forth further recollections to paint a clearer picture of the events that occurred. When I was young, my family moved from a small suburb to a large house in the middle of nowhere. I have no memory of the first house I lived in, but our new house became a hub of strange occurrences that only seem to happen to folks that live far outside of town in homes nestled in the woods. We lived at the base of a large hill covered in densely packed trees. These woods frightened and fascinated my childhood self, and while I have begun to recall some vague memories of strange happenings during my jaunts through the forest, those memories are not as clear as the ones I mean to share in this story. After about a year or two of living in our new home, my father became obsessive over our house's security for reasons I don't know or can't recall. He installed a massive picket fence around our property and bricked off the forested hill as best he could with large cinder blocks. Back in those days, security cameras weren't as easy to set up or come by, so he opted to install motion sensor lights around the entirety of our home. He would double and triple check the locks each night and was very insistent to me that I never go outside at night. Not that I even wanted to. I was terrified of the dark and all the things that may lurk there. I always slept with my bathroom light on. The day he put those lights up is the day that started the events that led me to write this. Events that, to this day, fill me with a deep sense of dread, even though the memories are still foggy and unclear. I had two windows in my childhood bedroom. One faced the forested hill, and the other faced more towards the front door. Being a little scared of the dark, I made sure my blinds were pulled close every night. There were those sort of weird segmented plastic blinds that never quite could keep out all the light, even when they were shut as tightly as possible. My father had installed motion sensor lights at every door, with several facing the hill in particular. The very first night, he put the lights up. As I lay nestled in my bed, listening to the songs of crickets and frogs while I tried to sleep, the light facing the hill flickered to life. That simple moment terrified my mind so much as a child that I am amazed the memory lay forgotten for so many years. While the blind of my windows were as shut as I could get them, I could still see segmented lines of light streaming through and arraying themselves in neat rows on my bedroom floor. I was paralyzed in my bed, too scared to call for my parents, fearing that I would attract whatever had caused those lights to come to life. As I lay there, I recall seeing a shadow move through the lines of light. After a moment, the lights installed by our front door also roared to life, streaming through the second window of my bedroom. It felt like an eternity that I laid there in the half-dark, watching the lines of light on my bedroom floor in case the shadow came back. After a long while, the lights shut off automatically, and I was left with only the light from my bathroom streaming in from my cracked open bedroom door. I did not sleep well that night. The following morning, I told my father what I had seen. He had a peculiar look on his face and took a long moment before he simply responded with, "It was probably just a deer. There's tons of them in those damn woods." There were a lot of deer in that area. In the spring, they would journey to our front yard to eat from our lilac bushes and lawn, much to my mother's chagrin. At the time, I was satisfied with this answer, and so when the lights turned on again and again and again, and when I heard the shuffling of footsteps and the crunching of leaves outside my window at night, I was never quite as frightened as I had been that first night. It went on like this for some time. Eventually, I accepted the routine and thought no more of the phenomenon until about a year later. My mother decided that she wanted to take advantage of our new country life and decided to buy 4 guinea hens. Why she decided on these god-forsaken birds and not something more simple, like chickens, is beyond me. They were horrible little birds that looked somewhere between a vulture and a turkey. My father built a hutch for them outside my bedroom, a large boxed-in space with tall walls and a metal mesh roof. They added a new, unpleasant suite of noises to the choir that sounded every night. The woods are never quiet. There were all manner of sounds from crickets chirping to coyotes yelping in the distance. Those goddamn guinea hens would make unpleasant, screaming, clucking noises right outside my window until late into the night. One night, as I lay in bed, I struggled to sleep. Something felt wrong, and for once, it wasn't the screaming of the guinea hens that was keeping me up. The outside lights were on, of course, but by this time, I had grown so accustomed to that phenomenon that I no longer kept my bathroom light on at night. It took me a while to realize what was wrong. It was quiet. This realization chilled my bones. The woods were never silent. Any hope of falling asleep left me. I felt my heart pounding hard and loud in my chest. That's when I heard a sound. Not a loud sound, but it seemed to echo, leaving our house once again thick with darkness. As time passed, the fear faded once again. I either dismissed the incident with the guinea hens as a fluke, or they faded into a dreamlike memory, as often happens with early childhood recollections. The fear slowly turned into curiosity as I got older. I started to go on walks in the woods, only during the day, but my fear of them had subsided to the point where I would spend hours exploring that hill. Up until that point, the thought of actually looking out the window to discover what was causing the lights to turn on had never even crossed my mind. I had been far too afraid to even consider the notion. However, as the phenomenon continued, my curiosity grew. One night, I finally resolved to do it. I always kept my blinds shut, but that night, when I saw the lights had come on, I carefully swung out of bed and crept towards the window. As I got closer, I recall that the air started to feel cold and smothering, like I was pushing into a blanket of snow. Despite the fact that it was midsummer in Southern California, I approached cautiously and wrapped my hand around the cord to lift up my blinds. In that moment, old fear overwhelmed me all at once, and I dropped the cord in a surge of panic, backing away from the window. The cord swung back and knocked against my wall, sounding incredibly loud as I realized with horror that the night was silent once again. It hit the wall and bounced back 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away towards my bed, barely daring to breathe, when I saw a shadow cross the light streaming from my window. Then I heard clearly something knock my window. Knock, knock, knock. The sound reverberated through me. 3 knocks for 3 taps. I ran back to my bed and pulled my blankets around me, watching the shadow on my floor and barely daring to blink. The shadow did not move, and no other lights turned on. I watched it until the motion sensor lights turned off automatically, and I could no longer tell if it was still there. I never really told anyone about these incidents. At the time, I thought nobody would believe me, and as I got older, the memories were crammed into a dusty trunk in a corner of my mind, where they lay forgotten for many years, until many of them rushed back with a freshness as if they had only just occurred. Now that I have unlocked these memories, they still fill me with a deep sense of dread. For the moment, I can recall only one more incident. The knocking did not stop. From that night onward, it would always pause and knock on my window, and always 3 times. Needless to say, I was fucking terrified. I dreaded going to bed. I hated being in my room, and I stopped all my ventures into the woods. However, amidst the sea of fear, I felt a compulsion to know what it was. I wanted to see what was causing my fear and dread at night. After a couple of weeks, with very little sleep, I finally couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know. The tapping returned that night, I got out of bed and walked towards the window, pretending to be more confident than I felt. I once again got that sensation of walking through something thick. The air had a weight and density to it. I reached the window. I reached my hand out and pulled down some of the blinds, just enough to peek through. What I saw is something that I truly cannot explain. However, despite all logic to the contrary, the memory of what I saw is so vivid that I have a hard time disbelieving it. Standing outside my window, clad in white, eyes wide and blank, was my mother. As I watched, frozen in fear, she bent over, backwards, with her eyes still locked on mine. Her bones twisted and snapped, the sockets in her shoulders popping as she bent backwards, never moving her head. Like some sort of wild animal, she crawled backwards into the forest until the darkness covered her once more. I thought I found love. I found a cult. I'm not sure where to start, but if I don't get this out now, I might not have another chance. It all started 3 weeks ago when I met George. I was at a furniture store nearby, killing time because their Christmas decorations are outlandishly pretty. Yes, I know. What do you mean? A furniture store has pretty decorative displays. But my town is weird like that, and I'm not going to apologize for enjoying it. That's where I met him. George struck up a conversation, charming and soft-spoken, with these dark eyes that felt intense and intoxicating in a rare sort of way. Before I knew it, we were exchanging numbers. At first, it seemed innocent. George texted me sporadically, nothing overbearing, just enough to keep me curious. We bonded over mutual tastes in books, weed, and horror movies. Insert eye rolls regarding the horror movies. Yes, I see the irony now that I'm posting this here. And yes, I love being a cliché. But who could blame me? It was those damn eyes of his, and his quiet, almost reserved demeanor that drew me. Seemed as good as anything. George's apartment was small but clean, with just enough furniture to make it functional. The sparse decor reminded me of the kind of place a guy like Patrick Bateman might live in. But I dismissed the thought as my usual paranoia. He handed me a glass of water as soon as I walked in, and while I usually prefer beer or nothing, I sipped it anyway. We settled on his bed, the glow of the TV illuminating the dim room. I adjusted the hem of my blue and white striped vineyard vine's top, glad I'd chosen something comfortable but cute. My black boots rested on the floor next to his nightstand, and I was already regretting wearing leggings in this stuffy apartment. George sat close, but not too close, which I appreciated. I wasn't sure if I wanted this to turn into something romantic, but I decided then that I wouldn't mind if it did. We were halfway through the second episode when there was a knock at the door. George got up, his expression unreadable, as he glanced at me. "Expecting someone?" I asked, half joking, taking a discreet puff from the weed pen I'd bought at the dispensary yesterday. Well, his back was turned. George didn't know I had it. I'd told him I only did edibles. It was the truth, usually. But like I said, I had been extra stressed during this time period. He didn't answer. He opened the door just wide enough for me to see a tall, muscular guy with shaggy blonde hair and piercing blue eyes standing in the hallway. The guy stepped inside without waiting for an invite, carrying a pizza box. I squinted, trying to place his familiar-looking face. "Ella, this is Diesel," George said casually. But something about the way he said it made my stomach knot. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "You didn't mention you were having company." Diesel didn't respond. He just stared at me, his gaze lingering on my chest for a bit too long. "Relax, Ella," George said, sitting back down beside me. "Diesel's an old friend." "Great," I muttered under my breath, rolling my eyes and reaching for my glass. The room felt smaller with Diesel in it. Something about him tugged at the edges of my memory. Then it hit me, like a truck. Events and adventures, a dating group for singles. We hooked up once last year, and then he ghosted me. My stomach churned. Things shifted after that. George's easygoing demeanor turned off. His smile was still there, but it didn't reach his eyes. Diesel didn't bother pretending at all. "You don't seem like George's type," Diesel said, leaning against the counter, his voice arrogant and teasing. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shot back, trying to sound braver than I felt. "She's feisty," Diesel smirked at George. "You didn't tell me she'd be fun." "Fun?" I screamed as loud as I could, hoping to alert the neighbors. Neither of them flinched, but I knew it was time to leave the apartment. But my feet felt like cinder blocks. George chuckled darkly. I wanted to keep it a surprise. My pulse quickened. What the fuck is going on? I stood up, heart pounding. George grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron. "Sit down, Ella." "Fuck you," I snapped, yanking my arm away. "You don't even know me." "Oh, I know. Enough," George said, his voice tight. "Everyone's seen all that footage of you. All those texts. You're not such an honest person, are you?" And to make his point, he grabbed the lavender weed pen out of my pocket and held it in front of me. "But you're a saint, right? You don't even smoke." He laughed mockingly. The words hit me like a punch. I froze. It was the same tone, the same implication I'd heard before, countless times in whispers I wished I could erase. From the daycare, from high school, from every moment I had tried to bury. I couldn't breathe. George shoved me back into the couch. I internally sighed, screamed, and rolled my eyes, realizing these corny little boys were trying to do some sort of good cop, bad cop routine. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Diesel moved closer, pulling out a knife. The blade gleamed in the dim light. Sit down, he said, coldly, pressing the knife to my throat. I froze, the cold steel biting into my skin and drawing enough blood to get me to stop struggling against it. She's going to be a problem, Diesel muttered, not moving the blade, but instead shifting his other hand to the gun I was now noticing in his pocket. She'll learn, George said, his voice eerily calm. We all had to. Once. Remember? Diesel smiled wickedly, then pulled a syringe from his pocket. What the? I screamed, but Diesel clamped a hand over my mouth, plunging the needle into my arm. My pink iPhone 15 clattered to the floor, the last tether to anything familiar. When I woke up, my head throbbed like it had been squeezed in a vice. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow on the room. I tried to sit up, but my wrists were bound to the armrests of a cold metal chair. Pie, good morning. A soft, feminine voice cooed somewhat menacingly from somewhere behind me. I craned my neck to see a petite woman with blonde hair tied into a tight bun. She wore a crisp white blouse and beige slacks, the kind of outfit you'd expect on someone running a seminar about mindfulness. Her smile was disarming, almost motherly, but her eyes held something cold, calculating. Obviously, I was not matching her confident, relaxed energy. Where am I? I demanded, my voice hoarse, my wrists struggling to find a way out of the restraints. Safe, she replied, stepping closer. For now. With a wink, she placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, and I flinched. My legs strained, but the restraints were made of strong stuff. Who the fuck are you? That does not matter right now. George and Diesel thought you could use some guidance, a little reprogramming. Reprogramming. The word hit me like a slap, and a memory surfaced. An article I'd written months ago about a pretty notorious cult, which had used similar vocabulary. They'd used words like recruitment, rebranding, and personal growth to justify horrific abuses. And now, one of their founders was standing right in front of me. You have no idea how lucky you are, she continued, crouching. So, we were eye level. Most people don't get a second chance. But Diesel saw potential in you, a spark, and that's why you're here. I thrashed against the restraints, my breathing ragged. Let me go. You can't keep me here. Shh, she hushed, pressing a finger to her lips. Resistance is natural at first. We've all been there. But you'll understand soon enough. You'll thank us. She winked, and I rolled my eyes. The door creaked open, and George stepped in, his dark eyes void of the warmth they once held. He was followed by Diesel, who leaned casually against the wall, a infuriatingly smug grin plastered on his face. George's gaze met mine. Are you fucking stupid? I have roommates, friends. The cops will be here in minutes. But everyone, especially George, looked unfazed. He let out a slow exhale, as if disappointed. Ella, George said, his voice low and steady. This doesn't have to be difficult. Go to hell. I spat, the words burning my throat. You're sick. All of you. The woman chuckled softly, standing up and smoothing her blouse. Oh, George. She's spirited. I like that. It'll make the transformation all the more rewarding. Diesel pushed off the wall, crossing the room with slow, deliberate steps. He picked up my pink iPhone 15 from a nearby table and held it up, inspecting it like a curious child. You've run away without notifying your parents before, and it's believable you'd do it again. Your friends know how flighty and distant you can be. So no one will actually care. Nice phone, by the way, he said, flipping it over in his hand. Too bad you won't be needing it anymore. He finished sending something before tossing it to the ground and smashing it. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound defiant. George stepped closer, his face inches from mine. We want you to let go of your lies, your past, your so-called independence. You've been living in a prison of your own making, Ella. We're offering you freedom. Freedom? I sneered. You drugged me and tied me to a chair. That's your idea of freedom? The blonde woman sighed, shaking her head. It's always hardest for the ones who've been hurt the most. But that's why we're here, to help you heal, to teach you how to be truly honest with yourself and others. I glared at her, my mind racing. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to fight, to scream, to do something. But the cold metal against my skin and the presence of George and Diesel made it clear that any attempt would be futile. What happens if I don't cooperate? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile faltered, and for a split second, her mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. You don't want to find out, she said, her voice a chilling blend of sweetness and menace. Diesel placed my phone back on the table and pulled out a small black device. He pressed a button, and a red light blinked to life. Smile for the camera, he said mockingly. This is just the beginning. My heart pounded as the reality of my situation sank in. Whatever they had planned, it wasn't just about me. They wanted to use me to break someone else, and I didn't know if I had the strength to stop them. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going down without trying. The door swung open again, and a new figure entered the room. She was tall, with sharp features, and an air of authority that made the blonde woman step back, her demeanor suddenly deferential. What's the holdup? The woman demanded, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Bone straightened, his expression tense. She woke up later than we anticipated. We didn't, I scoffed, leaning back against the cold wall. Useful? Please. If you're recruiting people like Diesel, this whole thing must be a scam. A club for failures who need to lie to themselves about how much of a loser they are. Diesel flinched, his face darkening. He stepped closer, and I couldn't resist twisting the knife a little further. You know, it makes sense now why you ghosted me after that hookup. I sneered, my voice dripping with venom. You always did seem nerdy and pathetic. The Star Wars posters? Yeah. You probably realized I was out of your league. George's jaw tightened, and Diesel's hands curled into fists at his sides. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but the anger bubbling inside me didn't care. My heart raced as I locked eyes with Diesel, daring him to respond. You really think you're better than us, don't you? Diesel hissed, his voice low and trembling with rage. You have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, I think I do. I shot back, crossing my arms. You're all just a bunch of desperate nobodies playing pretend. Your leader is a washed up, B-level at best, failed actor turned scammer. This whole operation is a joke. That did it. Diesel lunged forward, grabbing my arm with bruising force. Shut your mouth, he growled. The woman raised a hand, her expression calm, but her eyes blazing with amusement. Enough, Diesel. She's just scared. Let her have her little tantrum. But Diesel wasn't listening. His face twisted with fury as he pulled a cloth from the table. You're going to learn some respect, he spat, shoving it against my face. The sickly sweet smell of chemicals filled my nose, and I thrashed against his grip, but his strength was unrelenting. My vision blurred, the edges darkening as my limbs grew heavy. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the woman's cold, satisfied expression.